Hey Valley Middle, welcome to another G67 math video. Tonight we're going to be working with compound interest, but let's start with our trivia question of the day. What was the first show to air on the Disney Channel? We'll be back with that answer and much more. All right, tonight officially our target is I can compute compound interest. Let's do this thing. All right, remember the problem when we did on simple interest on Casey and his MacBook? Well, we're back tonight. Casey wants to buy that MacBook Pro for college. He doesn't have enough money. But his clever brother Connor offers to loan him the money at only 15% interest compounded yearly for the first 4 years he's in college. Connor convinces Casey to buy a top-of-the-line MacBook for $2,000. How much will this computer cost Casey with interest? Let's stop for a moment and go back and look at how you would calculate this if it was simple interest, not compounded yearly or compounded interest. Here it was from last night. You just use the PRT, you pop it in. Principal rate and time equals the interest. So the principal was $2,000. The interest was 15%. The time listed in years was 4. It was a total of $1,200. It was still expensive, $3,200. Too expensive for the computer. His brother was making out like a bandit on that interest. All right, let's take a look at what happens tonight though when we're working with compounding interest. So we're going to set the problem up the same way. Get my screen going here. We're going to use PRT. Let me get this. Principal rate and time will beat the interest. But what we're going to have to do is we have to do 4 steps because the interest is going to compound yearly. So each year we have to stop and figure out how much interest he paid on that year. So watch the way it works. Here was the $2,000. Here's the interest as a decimal, 0.15. 1 year. At the end of that first year, he owes $300 in interest. Watch what happens. Now you tack that interest on to the principal. Beginning of the second year, he owes $2,300 times 15% times 1 year, of course. That second year, his interest goes up from $300 to $345, and you can figure out what's going to happen next. Now we're going into year 3, but his starting principal is now up $645 higher, times 15% interest times the 1 year. Now he's paid almost $400 in interest that third year. Notice how the interest keeps going up. Of course, the interest has to go up because the principal is getting larger each year. So because this was a 4-year loan and it's compounding yearly, we're going to have 4 different transactions. Here's the first 3. Here's the last one. On year 4, he starts off with $3,041 as his principal. So his interest on that at 15% for 1 year is $456, bringing the total price of that computer to $3498.01. Nearly $300 more because the interest was compounding yearly. You can see the power and the trouble caused by compounding interest. This is something that is typically used on credit cards. Sometimes they're compounded monthly, sometimes they're compounded daily. You're lucky if you can get one that compounds quarterly or semi-annually. Rarely will one compound yearly. All right. I threw a lot of vocabulary there right there, but let's take a look at what we talked about. Interest is that money that's either paid or earned for the use of money. Simple interest, that's what we did last night. That's just this, interest times principal times rate times time. And remember that the principal is the amount of money that's borrowed or invested. The rate is always expressed as a decimal, and the time is always expressed in years. Now tonight, compound interest. This is interest based upon the principal amount and the accumulated interest. Remember what Casey had going on here? The second year, he was paying interest on not only the $2,000, but also the interest from the first year. So in compounding interest, in a nutshell, you're paying interest on the principal and on the interest. Okay? Annually, that means yearly. Semi-annually is a term we'll use. That's twice a year. Quarterly is 4 times per year. All right, I think it's important when you're working with this to make a plan and make a chart. What do I mean by that? All right, well, let's go back to Casey's example. We said he was borrowing the money for 4 years and it was going to compound yearly. So that meant I was going to have to make 4 calculations. That's why That's my plan. I'm going to make 4 calculations, and of course you're going to make a chart. And you saw how I made that chart and how I brought down, when I was doing that, I carried that interest down and added on to the principal of the next year. Calculated again, carried it down, brought it on, and tacked it on to the principal for the next year. Calculated the interest again. So that's what I mean by making a plan and making a chart. This is the best way to do it. You might be asking, why do we have to take it times 1? Well, what if I said it was compounded every quarter? That means you'd have to use 0.25 down here because it's time in years, and a quarter of a year is 0.25 of a year. All right, we'll do some different examples like that, but let's get back to our first problem. All right, Shirley the shopper charged $1,750 in the back-to-school essentials at Mall of America on her new credit card. Now, the credit card has no payments for 6 months. However, the interest rate is 17% compounded monthly. If she makes no payments, how much will she owe at the end of the 6 months? All right, well, let's think about this. Let's make our plan. It's going to compound monthly, and it's going to be for 6 months. So I'm going to have to do 6 different interest calculations. And I'm going to use simple interest formula, but 6 different times. And I'm going to have to carry that interest down and add it onto the principal. Here's what it's going to look like. We still have principal, rate, and time. Same thing here. But here we go. We start off. We have our original cost that she charged $1,750 times 0.17. Now, I have to list the time in years. So basically, 1 month is 1/12 of a year, or I'm using this approximation 0.08333. So if you do this on an interest calculator, it might come out a little bit differently because I'm rounding here to the 5th decimal. All right. So after the end of that first year, she owes the first month, it's $24.79 in interest. All right. I have to tack that on to the $1,750. Here's my new interest amount, my new principal and interest. The end of the second month, she has another $25 in interest. The interest just keeps going up. All right, here's month 3. Here's month 4. I just keep bringing it down and tacking it on. Month 5 and month 6. I'm going to just get rid of the screen. Sorry about that. I can't get rid of the screen. I guess I got to shut it off. There we go. At the end of the 6 months, that money she will owe $1,904.37. Again, that's an approximation because I went to the 5th decimal only on this. All right, so basically, it's going to cost her about $155 over 6 months. That's her interest on that small amount of money. So, okay, what if she was just paying simple interest? Well, let's just take a look at it. If it was simple interest, it would just be $1,750 times that 0.17 times 0.5. Half a year, right? $148. So it would be a little bit less money if she had a simple interest. All right. So I think we're starting to understand that compounding interest is much more difficult than simple interest because we have to make multiple calculations. All right. Time for one more problem before I cut you loose. Here this is now to find the interest rate. Sorry about that. Tommy puts $15,000 into a certificate of deposit at his bank for 12 months at 7% interest, compounded quarterly. How much will the CD be worth at the end of 12 months? Remember that sometimes we're earning interest, and that's a good thing. All right, let's take a look at this. So I made a chart here and I actually did this one on my computer. Here's the principal of $15,000. The rate is 7%. It's going to be quarterly, right? So 0.25 for the year. And his interest for that first quarter would be $262. I tack that on to the principal. 7%. Here's the interest for that second quarter. Here's the interest for the third quarter. Just keep tacking this interest. Look at, by the time we're in the 4th quarter, he has nearly $15,801 that he's now earning interest on. Compounding interest can be a good thing too. So after 1 year, $15,000 compounding quarterly at 7% interest, he'd have $16,077.89. Basically, he made $1,077.89 in that year. Not bad. Those figures would all be differently. If it was compounded monthly, it would be higher, obviously. Compounded yearly or simple interest, it would be less. Okay? Compounded daily, what a great thing. It will be even more. The more often it's compounded, the higher the frequency, the more the interest will be. It's a great thing if you're earning it. It's a terrible thing if you're paying it. Okay? Because if you're paying it, you're paying interest on interest. All right, time for you to try a couple problems and for me to quit lecturing on borrowing money. All right, go ahead and try this one. $1,500 at 25% interest for 2 years, compounded semi-annually. Remember, that means twice a year. Did you make a plan? Did you make a chart? Okay, you're going to have to do 4 calculations. 2 years, semi-annually. 2 times 2, you're going to have 4. Here's my chart right here. You can check yours, see how you did. $1,500. My rate was 0.25, 25% interest as a decimal, remember. 0.5 was the year because it's annually or semi-annually, so I'm using 0.5 or half a year. My total, $2,402.71. Yikes. I hope he's earning that, not paying that interest. All right, one more. Try 10,000 at 5% interest, 1 year, compounded quarterly. I'm giving you some easy ones here. I could have said 5 years and it would have been 5 times 4 would have been 20 calculations. I just did 1 year. You had to make a plan there. 4 different calculations. So $10,000, you'd have $125 in interest the first year, $126 in the second year, $128 in the third year. Remember, you just got to keep adding that on into the principal before you do that next calculation. $10,509.45 at the end of that 1 year. That's compounding quarterly. Okie dokie. Time for the ticket to the show. Billy Joe finances a diamond necklace. She borrows $4,000 for 4 years at 10% interest, compounded semi-annually. Make a plan, folks. Make a chart. How much will she pay for that necklace? All right. Time for the ticket to the show. What was the first show to air on the Disney Channel? Wasn't very exciting. Well, at least not for us got older folks. Welcome to Pooh Corner. I do remember it. And they had some like animated animals on there that was supposedly high tech at the time, really not now, but it was on from 1983 to 1986. The very first show aired on April 18th, 1983. Thanks for listening. Hope you learned something about compounding interest. Have a great day.